So after much controversy, Q-Force, the animated action comedy show about queer spies, arrived on Netflix. It's written by Gabe Liebman, who was also the showrunner for Pen 15 Season 1 and a writer on Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and it was produced by Sean Hayes of Will and Grace fame. Hayes also voices protagonist Steve Merriweather, who is the leader of the Q-Force. The series centers on a group of agents who have been sidelined because they are queer and their adventures along the way. When I first saw the teaser, like many other people, I thought the show would be a steaming pile of hot garbage. I can confirm that teaser highlighted the worst aspects of the show, and after watching the entirety of the first season, I can say that the show is, it's pretty okay. I thought I'd talk more about my thoughts on the show, pros, cons, and what I would want to see should the show be picked up for another season. So spoilers ahead, folks. Let's start off with the pros. Let's start off with all the good things that people might have missed. The characters. In an ensemble cast like this, the characters have to be well written and we have to believe in their camaraderie. Found family is an especially important theme in shows about queer people, and Q-Force is no exception to this. In fact, this is where the show shines brightest. These characters poke fun at each other, but they also have close bonds of friendship. It's not just pissy gay people quipping at each other back and forth in an attempt to one-up one another, which is what I think a lot of people initially thought it would be. Stat and Twink learn to appreciate one another despite being polar opposites. Mary and Deb make an excellent duo. I just love their friendship, and Mary's relationship with V, who is his superior and mother figure, is also excellent and fun to watch. I believe in the love and the friendship that they all have for one another. It's surprisingly wholesome and cute. And the voice cast on the show is super talented, and it's a delight to listen to Wanda Sykes and Patty Harrison in their respective roles of Deb and Stat. Art. Some people really hate the art style for the show, which I'm sorry, but this has got to be one of the most bizarre criticisms that I've seen about this show. Like, some people think it's ugly, I guess. Like, people have commented some negative things on the line work and the character designs, but in my opinion, this is probably one of the strongest elements of the show. I love the character designs. They're distinctive, different, not stereotypical, and they're so much more vibrant compared to a lot of other things we see out there, particularly in the world of adult animation. And I love the mixture of thick and thin line art, and I love how expressive the characters get to be. And the backgrounds, the lighting, I mean, come on, look at that, that's gorgeous. This show is a visual delight. Depictions of queer intimacy. So this is small, but I wanted to bring this up because I think it's important to discuss. I really appreciate how the series depicted queer intimacy. It wasn't treated as a joke or over the top and gross, it just was what it was. They didn't play cartoonish music during the sex scenes, they just had nice romantic music accompanying it. And in the animated world, there hasn't been very many depictions of queer intimacy, so props to them for that. Sound design and score. I am not the best person to comment on this, but I'll give it a shot. The show has a catchy theme that pays homage to other great spy stories. It also boasts some original music and drag songs, which are admittedly catchy. I love how those were incorporated into it. The blending of the high-octane action and princess pop is fabulous. Fantastic. Sound design is good. There's no issues with the voice acting lines. I think it's a show that tries to be more grounded in realism, so I think that there's surprisingly fewer sound effects than you would expect to hear in an animated show. It gives it a distinctive sound or ambiance, so to speak. And everything is well blended and leveled out. There aren't any parts that are hard to hear or make me need to turn down the volume, which sometimes can happen in action sequences in animation. I think that it can try to be a little more playful in future seasons, but overall, good job. And now here are some of the cons. Oh man, it hurts to bring this up. Alright, cons. So, plot lines revolving around homophobia. So much of the first season's plotline revolves around homophobia. At first, it's about a group of gay agents who have been sidelined because of their queerness and their struggle for validity and visibility in the world of super spies. It later shifts to a plotline about a technology called grayscale, which was used to erase memories of queer agents because homophobia. Now, to me, this doesn't really work that well. The show starts in 2011 when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed. It does a time skip then to 10 years later in 2021, which I don't think necessarily serves the series all too well and its setup. My reasons for this being that a lot of the show's humor and focuses on homophobia seems like it would have been more relevant 10 years ago. Or even if the show had been set in 2015 when same-sex marriage was legalized, that would have been an even better turning point, but it's just not. The show's focus on homophobia, while valid, I mean, yeah, the government is deeply conservative and traditional, is not something that I foresee as being sustainable. I personally would not want to continue watching the show if the main plot continues to revolve around something homophobia, and I would despise it if the next season goes on to be about transphobia or lesbophobia or butchphobia or biphobia, etc. It's fine to have some of the conflict revolve around those themes, but not entire plot lines, please. Now, the show didn't plant any seeds for that to happen, so to speak. Season 1 wraps up pretty cleanly with them having dismantled Grayscale, saved the world, and won the respect of the AIA. I don't think the show is going to continue to focus on homophobia bad, save world from homophobia, but I really want to emphasize it here because this makes an important distinction. Q-Force can continue to be a show about queer spies tackling queer issues, or it can be a show about spies who just happen to be queer and how they navigate the world. The first option being more educational, and the second being more sustainable for its targeted queer audience, and honestly just super important for its longevity and cultural legacy. I would never say, you can't discuss homophobia in your show about queer people. I'm not trying to say that. They can definitely do that. I'm just trying to say that you need to expand beyond that. Twink's dialogue. So I love Twink as a character. Yes, from the trailers and the teasers, he comes across as a very over-the-top, very stereotypical, effeminate gay man, but he's a lot more than that. I promise he's a lot more than that. He uses drag, he's a master of disguise, he's a badass acrobatus and combat specialist, total force to be reckoned with. He's great. He's great. He's a multifaceted character. But every time he opens his mouth, it's like they undo all the work that they've done to make Twink not just be an effeminate gay man, but a person. And yes, his effemininity, that is who he is as a person, and he should totally embrace that, and that should be a big part of his character. And it's not a negative thing for that to be a big part of his character, as much as people want to believe that it is. But again, it's like the writing can't have this dude make a comment that doesn't have something to do with pride or drag or brunch or being an effeminate queer man in general, whereas Mary is totally capable of that. Twink really isn't, and that was kind of a disappointment for me. Weird variations in pacing. This is probably my biggest problem with the series so far. Some episodes feel so damn long, and when the stakes are really high, the episode seems to linger and avoid plot-heavy stuff. The episode where they have to rescue Deb's wife Pam from the castle is the longest episode ever. Like, I was literally sitting there, I thought it was a 2-part episode. I paused the show because I was like, I have to be close to the end of this episode, right? I mean, I've been here forever, and I was only halfway through. And I mean, that's just the weird thing, is that the wife's life is literally in danger, and yet somehow Twink has the time to go around and talk to drag queens and other people who are performing at this big event. Buck has time to hook up with the princess, and Stat has this whole other storyline with like this other robot that started, and it's just, this is where the show really is dying for me. This is an episode that to me should have been really high octane, going from one goal to the next, and it just didn't feel that way. And you might say that part of being a spy is an action and violence, but quiet disguise and subterfuge. It's infiltrating someplace without being undetected. It's also investigating. But I still think that one of the biggest issues of the show is that some episodes feel way longer than others, and I think that they really need to work on addressing that in future seasons. Not funny. So I may have chuckled a couple times, but a lot of the show's humor revolves around gay jokes that again have been recycled on the internet just hundreds of times. I mean, this is literally just pulled from Twitter. And the worst part, I think, is that the insertions of these jokes seem random and sometimes forced. It feels like every time they're gonna break to move to a next part of their mission or move the plot forward, there's gonna be a gay joke that precedes that. And it's not humor that catches you off guard, and it just feels really formulaic. And a lot of the episodes have humor that revolves around Buck being naked, which is, like, also not funny. Benji as a romantic interest. Benji is Mary's romantic interest. He's a cute, nice dude, but he's very bland, I'm sorry. He feels like he exists just to give Mary something to cry about rather than be his own character. Even when we go to visit his parents or see him with his friends, he doesn't feel like fully fleshed out to me. I don't know what Benji's interests are. I don't know what his goals are. I don't know why Mary is attracted to him, and honestly, I don't really believe in their relationship. They don't don't seem to have a lot of chemistry. They go to brunch together and meet his parents, and we see them having fun as a couple. We see them say, "I love you," but like, I still don't believe it. We get small tidbits of it, but not enough for me to really root for those two to stay together, or for the hard-hitting emotional beats, like them breaking up, to really hurt. This could tie into the show's issues with pacing, like it's just progressing their relationship super fast so that Mary has more personal conflicts. But actually, I don't think it's that so much as it's, wow, I just don't believe in them at all. They have relatively little in common aside from being gay men in their 30s. Unlike Pam and Deb, who have conversations with each other about their relationship and have a great sense of intimacy, Mary and Benji really don't have that. And if Benji is going to continue to be a part of this show, he really needs to have more focus and be more fleshed out. I have to have some reason to care about his relationship with Mary, and as it stands, I just don't. He feels like he could be easily replaced with someone else. So, you know, if that is their intention, that Benji's gonna exit out the end of this season and we're gonna move on to somebody else, then do it. Otherwise, if Benji's gonna continue to stake around, he needs to have more screen time. He needs to be more developed. I need more of him and Mary together. Not a con, but a concern. Buck. So, as I suspected when I saw the trailer for the show, the straight dude probably isn't entirely straight. When I saw the trailers, I thought that Buck and Mary would actually be playing off of each other romantically, but actually it's Twink and Buck. The show appears to be setting up Buck and Twink. Okay, I'm calling it now. You can totally disagree with me, but I'm just saying. There are a lot of conflicts that revolve around Buck and Twink. Twink also dresses as the princess in a couple of episodes and learns more about Buck, and even rescues him in the finale. I think that the big conflict in their attraction to each other that I'm seeing is that Buck may only be attracted to Twink when he is in drag and not when he's presenting as a man. And if they're setting them up to be together, I really hope that they handle that sensitively. Buck right now presents as a super masked straight dude, and I think that he's going to come out as bi if the show continues. But bi people in the LGBT community are looked down upon, and man, it really doesn't make me feel good that while Buck appreciates his teammates, he seems relatively hostile or still uncomfortable with their queerness at the end of season 1. He's still very insecure in his masculinity and in his relationship with the others on the team. We have such little representation for bi men on screen. We don't have many, if any, explicit bi men in the world of adult animation, so it's so important for this to be handled sensitively and for him to not be made a mockery or perpetuate negative stereotypes about bi people. Like, yes, bisexuals have gender preferences. It's totally fine if Buck is predominantly attracted to women or femmes and continues to be hyper-masculine. That's a totally valid way for a bi person to live. Personally speaking, I prefer to date women more than men, but that's not a universal thing. And it's not like a man would have to dress in drag to appeal to me. If I'm attracted to him, I'm attracted to him as a person. Being bi isn't about an obsession with gender presentation, it's about liking someone for who they really are, all parts of them. I would like to see Buck maybe break down his walls of hypermasculinity. I would like to see him hang out with the Force more and not reluctantly or just on a mission. Basically, that's what I'm trying to say. Don't make it a running gag that Buck is all too eager to be with Twink when he's in drag, but is disgusted by him when he isn't. We don't need Twink to be in a relationship with someone who makes him feel like shit, and we don't need a bi man who suffers from internalized homophobia or biphobia perpetuated as funny. It's not funny. It's a stereotype that harms gay men and bi men who are super marginalized in the queer community. Playing into stereotypes like that when bi people are more likely to be the victims of violence and not the perps is icky, so please don't do that. I would actually root for these two to get together, but only if they handled it right. So, what this show needs to do, and my final thoughts in general. So I struggle to find evidence of whether or not Gabe Liebman is the only writer on this series, or if the show in fact has a writer's room. Variety, Deadline, and Hollywood Reporter, all leading publications in the entertainment world, all referred to Liebman as the writer of the show. Not the showrunner or the lead writer, but the writer, which led me to think that he was the only person writing the show. But I went through the credits to see who else was credited as a writer, and there are only two other people, Lisa Dye and Matt Rogers. I thought that this was kind of weird, so I went and I cross-referenced the end credits of the show with the series writing credits that are listed on IMDb. Chloe Keenan is also credited as a story editor. Ira Madison III is also credited as a story editor, so I don't know if Keenan and Madison are technically considered a part of the writer's room. I don't know if this is a writer's room that's consisting of like 3 people, just 3 people, or if it's consisting of 5 people in total: Liebman, Keenan, Madison, Dye, and Rogers. Also, there are some other credits for people. I'm not quite sure what these credits are. Zachary Alexander Stevens on here. Zachary Alexander Stevens on here, he is listed as the writer's assistant in the credits, so this could just be an issue of the inconsistency in the credits, but I mean, if Keenan and Madison are only story editors and don't necessarily work as staff writers, such as Dye and Rogers and Liedman do, I mean, why not just add them to the team in that circumstance? I'm not quite sure how this writer's room is run, but it just felt a little unusual to me when I saw the end credits and there's only 2 people credited as staff writers, there's 2 story editors, and then you go on to IMDb and it seems to be like a slightly different story. I'm not quite sure why this is broken down the way that it is, but I think that just in general, I would recommend expanding the writer's room more, including more people, including those people solidly as 5 staff writers, or even adding more people to that. She-Ra had 6 people in comparison, all comprised of women and non-binary people. I'm just saying that when you add more diverse voices to a writer's room, the show tends to get better and eliminate potential series problems. Again, She-Ra was comprised of a writer's room that had women and non-binary people, but it was also entirely white, which led to a lot of issues with how the show was written, ones that I won't go into right now, but you can definitely look up. And again, this isn't some indie show. This is made by Titmouse Animation and Netflix. They can and should hire more people. I understand that for the first season, they maybe wanted to keep the budget as tight and light as possible, but Netflix, if you're gonna greenlight them for a second season, let them hire more people. Whoever's in charge of giving these people money for the writer's room and whatever, I don't know if it's Netflix, I don't know if it's Titmouse, please give them more money to hire more people for this writer's room. Q-Force boasted that it was a show representative of the community behind the scenes and in front. And while a lot of the storyboard artists, animators, and voice actors working on the show are queer, these guys don't necessarily have a lot of control over the creative decisions and the final product, what we see, on the streaming service. They're just executing what they're being told to execute. So I want to see more pride taken in the other people writing the show, and quite honestly, I want more people writing this show. I want to see them taking the helm rather than this just being boasted in the media as a Liedman project. There's other people there who deserve to shine. Otherwise, the show is going to continue to feel bland. And like I said, I'm hella nervous about what they're going to do with Buck, and Stat for that matter, who seems to be a trans woman but hasn't yet been explicitly stated as such. I think the show also needs to narrow down its audience. Like I said, a lot of the jokes feel like they would have been better for an older audience. A young queer person has heard these hundreds of times on Twitter and Tumblr, so it's really not funny anymore. Now, you might say that because I've listed more cons than pros, that I'm saying this show is awful. No, it's not. And again, one of those cons is just speculation based off of what I saw in the first season. Maybe Buck isn't a closeted bi man, he's actually still straight. Okay. I think Q-Force is struggling to find its footing in the first season, and it needs more creative input from people who aren't gay cis white men. Adding a couple more people to the writer's room could really help. I think that's all this show needs. You have a good foundation. I mean, you've got good art, you've got good characters, but you need the writing to improve to carry you forward, so just invest in that. Sometimes shows have a rough first season, but they find their footing later. Q-Force having a so-so first season doesn't mean that it's any kind of major blow to the community. I think that the show could also shape up to be something really great. It's like a house with good bones. It just needs a little more love in some places, and probably some other experts call in, and Liedman needs to not do all the DIY. Okay, you get the metaphor, right? You get it. It's a house. So in conclusion, was Q-Force awesome? No, not entirely. Was it horrible? No, it was fairly okay. I wouldn't be so harsh as to call it mediocre either, but it's definitely teetering on that line right now. I think a lot of people were compelled to be outright vicious to the show because of how it was marketed, and I don't think that's entirely fair. If the show was cancelled, I wouldn't necessarily mourn its loss. I would be sad to lose such a talented voice cast, and I would be absolutely pissed at Netflix for misrepresenting the show so horribly in its marketing and then seemingly hiding it from the new shows list. It's a brand new show and I had to search to find it, which to me communicates that Netflix really just wants it to fail. And I'm sad that now it seems like it's up to fans of the show to really unscramble the mess that Netflix made so that they can get the representation from the show that they desire. And the sad thing is, I'm also worried about what's going to happen if the show doesn't get renewed for another season. Is Netflix then going to use this as an excuse to not greenlight more shows with queer rep and claim that they're not good? I mean, if Q-Force does well, it could really help further advance queer representation on screen. It could pave the way for other adult animated shows with queer rep. But do I really want the show to be renewed for a second season if it continues the problems from the first and descends into mediocrity? I mean, I don't know. It's sad that a queer show has to hold all these problems with it and not just have the right to be a show. There's a lot riding on Q-Force right now, and that's really unfortunate. And if the show gets canceled, I think people are gonna blame the writers and just say, oh, well, this is the writer's fault, like they just didn't write a good show. But here's the thing, it's not entirely the writer's fault, it's Netflix's. We have no idea what the overall budget for the show is or how the writer's room is formed, but Netflix did the show no favors by marketing it as poorly as they did. It feels like Netflix tried to sabotage the show, and that doesn't sit well with me. Had they not done what they did, I think Q-Force would have had a better critical reception. But yeah, that teaser put together the worst parts of the show. The queer community, I will also say, has been very hostile towards the show. I've seen people decrying the show because they said that it's not representative of the community, and while I understand that sentiment, if Stat is a trans woman, which it seems like she is, they still haven't made that explicitly clear, and if Buck is bi, he still has a long way to go, and there's no explicit ace rep on the show yet either. But I think expecting people to represent every aspect of this community right off the bat, especially in the first season when it's just trying to establish the world and kind of rules of the world, and condemn it if it doesn't, is a little reactionary and unnecessary. Like, yeah, Netflix should be held to an extremely high standard, but I think that Q-Force is in many ways a first of its kind for this wide-scale and mainstream audience. Let's not root for it to fail before it has a chance to find its footing. And I would honestly so much rather that we accuse Netflix of not giving this team everything they need to succeed instead of blaming and dogpiling those in the writer's room, because again, Netflix has demonstrated that maybe they're not really the best and maybe don't care a lot about this show. Ultimately, I'm going to be patient with Q-Force, and I think we all should be. If you hate the show, yeah, just don't continue to watch it, but also don't harass or hate the creators or the fans of the show. Just go find better rep in indie spaces and just support indies. I mean, the rep is better there anyways. And if you like it, that's great. You know, there's nothing wrong with you. But let's just keep watching to see if it gets any better. So, thank you all so much for taking the time to watch this video. Take everything that I said with a grain of salt. Again, I just think that maybe the show isn't all as bad as people expect it to be, and I think that it's just getting a bad rap just because of what happened with the marketing. If you like this video, please leave a like. It really does help the channel out, and also consider subscribing, and when you subscribe, be sure to hit the notification bell so you get updates on when I upload future episodes. Without further ado, thank you all so much for watching. Bye! I would like to give a very special shout out and thanks to my patrons, AceWolf741, Deep Dive Dylan, D. Roberts, Brian White, Deevil J, Caleb Putnam, Robin Harper, Bob Conway, Cody Webb, and Maticus Sama.